remediation, our staff and elected officials. I would like to thank you for your attendance, and I'm going to take your attendance here as evidence of your interest and support of this program. I'm not aware that we incentivized your presence, so therefore I'm going to assume that you're here because you're interested in the program. I know that our staff is very excited about this opportunity. It is a next step forward, or a next piece in the puzzle to revitalizing our downtown, or continuing the vitalization effort downtown. I say a next step and not the next step because it's likely that everyone in the room is aware that we have a number of significant and conspicuous projects going on, or will be going on. With the recent, relatively recent completion of the first phase of the Greenway, we include the Broad Street Bridge, although until it's done, it's likely viewed as the detractor of activity downtown, but it is an important piece of infrastructure for our downtown. We have the Community Development Block Grant program. There should be evidence of facade renewals, and beginning next week, you'll start to see some evidence of additional streetscape improvements. And the staff is pursuing the next phases of the Greenway. This opportunity presents the opportunity to create, we believe, additional private sector investment in downtown by, if not eliminating impediments, at least quantifying and clarifying impediments. And I know that Michael, as an individual, was very excited about the grant opportunity. We were very supportive, but perhaps not as optimistic about the success. So now that he has successfully achieved the grant or won the award, we're behind you all the way, Michael. And his success will be determined in great part by the participation and support that he receives from the community. So again, on behalf of our municipal organization, thank you for your attendance, and I'll hand it over to Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Ham. Again, Michael Barnes, Director of Planning for the city. I think I know many of you. For those of you who don't know, I think what I want to try and talk about tonight, before we really get into the consultants and have them introduce themselves, is sort of how we got here, sort of the context. Be a presentation some of you all have seen before, but I think it's worthwhile talking about again. And really what we're talking about, I keep sort of talking about Waynesboro as where we are today and where we want to be 5-10 years from now. And this is a great step in that process. And if you sort of think about our city on a graph with progress going up and time going along, you harken back to, many years ago when, in the 1890s, we had a plan for economic development for this city. And I know Greg Hitchens folks have talked about the need for our city to continue to plan for development in our city and redevelopment in our city. And something, they were very successful. Development went up, but at a certain point it started to go down. I don't know whether it was in the 80s or when, but I think we can talk about now, I think at least in the downtown area, I think through a lot of efforts of people beyond the city, but in partnership with the city, I think we've hit a floor, and I think that downtown over the past several years has shown a remarkable resiliency, and I think that's in part to the efforts that we've done on the other fronts, but I think will be some of the efforts we're starting here tonight. But that downward trend is what we're seeking to reverse, and I think what we're trying to do is to create a tipping point, a point where enough is happening that investor confidence, business confidence in our downtown solidifies and starts to work together, that people believe that downtown can come back. And again, I would postulate that when I started here 4 years ago, this time of night, you wouldn't have found a car on Main Street. And now there's a lot more people and a lot more business activity, and I think it's a great signal of what we've achieved so far. What we've really been working on over the past 3 years in the planning department as a city as a whole is sort of three major areas. Infrastructure investment, and I'm going to talk briefly about those tonight, but it's the streetscape and other projects. Trying to promote significant private investments, key projects that start to get, you work on the infrastructure and make the streets and the public space look good, but you really get good economic activity to get something going on inside the building. And that's really what we need to be focused on. And then the third one is increasing the number of downtown residential units. There's 25 residential units in this town, in the downtown, and significantly increasing those will increase the number of people living downtown. And the more people who live downtown, the more patrons you have in downtown businesses, the more activity you have on the street. The more activity you have on the streets, people come back to downtown. Downtowns these days are social places. They are places where people come to see and be seen, and somehow we need to continue to build on the momentum that we have and bring more people to downtown. And so that will help. So this whole idea of turning that downward slope on that fulcrum, 100% revitalization comes about by many 5% successful solutions. So it's not a silver bullet, it's lots of small things. And so as far as the infrastructure stuff, we're starting the streetscape stuff. Some of the work's begun this week. We're going to start in earnest next week. And I'm not going to get into the details of all these things. Many of you have heard this stuff, and you're more than welcome to go to our website, which is revitalizing downtown Waynesboro, all one word, .com, where we get into the minutia of what these projects are. We've also completed the Greenway Trail last year, and I think that's been a huge success in the downtown. I know many of you all are fans of it and use that trail, and of course, we're working to try and expand that into other neighborhoods and expand its impact into downtown. We're also working on Constitution Park and working towards the river and embracing that river, which we have identified as a key resource for our community. We're doing lots of smaller things. The branding efforts that happened a couple years ago, we're getting ready to do some wayfinding signage over the next 6 months to try and bring tourists and establish our brand and to bring tourists into the downtown. We completed the fish deck by the river using a lot of local donations. We're working on some more street trees, either in phase 1 or elsewhere. That's still to be seen. Tom Carlson has been working on the facade program in downtown, and already you've seen some really market improvement in some of the buildings downtown. And I think that's a huge success and a confidence booster. And then finally, the Broad Street Bridge, which is being replaced now, and the West Main Street Bridge, which creates Race Avenue, which is a key component of what we're going to do with this plan. And I'll talk more about that in a second. But all of those things together with these other things, everybody was talking about that looking like a rocket, so there you are. We're going to take off. As far as the significant investments, just to sort of remind you of a couple that we've already done or already managed to get here in the city. Lumos apparently is busting at the seams. They've got more employees than they have space in that building. That's a great sign. The Kroger investment that happened a couple of years ago made that spot look a lot better. Street trees along both Market and Arch. And I think we can hope that they'll do further improvements inside the store. We're very fortunate to have a downtown grocery store. Again, back to that residential, many downtowns in our area would kill for a grocery store. It's the kind of thing that pairs really well with residential uses. We've got the Wayne Theater, which hopefully will start soon. We keep hearing good news, and there's small stumbling blocks, but I think they are moving forward, and that will happen. And that provides one more activity center, one more way to bring people down. No matter what you think of that particular proposal, it's about getting people to the downtown and getting feet on the street. The ice plant, as many of you all know, we have received through the governor's industrial revitalization fund, a low interest loan for the developer to help spur the redevelopment of that building and create 30 dwelling units and some mixed uses in that building. We're very excited about that project. There's a Center for Cold Water Research and others. I think that's what we really need to be focused on, because this project could also be and they're going to talk about the planning aspect that's going to be in this project, and I think that's really going to be key to spurring those other significant private investments in our town. The final thing, because I don't want to belabor it, and I think you all really came to hear them, is the idea for opportunities for Race Avenue and for, turn down the lights, please, and the new Race Avenue that we're going to construct. In this thing here, you see the southern half of the park plan that many of you all have seen pictures of. and the West Main Street Bridge that's going to be replaced in 2016. What happened with that was we talked to VDOT about the bridge, and they were proposing a 3-lane section, so they have a middle turn lane onto McElroy Street in the middle of the park. We talked them into a 2-lane section and removing McElroy and replacing it with a new Race Avenue at the edge of the park. Not only does that create a better space for festivals and park space in our downtown and attraction in our downtown, it also sets up a whole area of potential redevelopment along the other side of this new road. And part of this project is going to help look at those types of properties. Another view of that is looking at the West Main Street Bridge here, an aerial view, sort of, you're someplace looking north, with Constitution Park here and Arch Avenue. And the idea of adding this new street along here opens up this whole area to potentially sort of really take advantage of the new park. Again, an attraction for residential uses as well as other people who may come to spend the day near our river, in our park, come to festivals, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of what this project is talking about is looking at individual properties. This one actually may not be one of the ones we actually do. It was done with an environmental assessment last year. But looking at properties, taking those properties and envisioning what they might be. Or this whole Block A area that I keep referring to, this sort of area along the future Race Avenue. What does it turn into? Does it turn into multi-use buildings that front this park and take advantage of that resource? And so what we are hopefully getting to this project, and I want to try and stress that, we've done a lot of the grant writing or city investment in getting those infrastructure improvements. We have been working with the private sector, or the private sector has led on things to actually create new investments in our downtown. And what this project is going to do is sort of leverage all this work we've been doing to help take these plans in these certain areas in our downtown, and they'll become more specified as we actually move through this process. But to look at places like the Race Avenue corridor and the East Main Street corridor, at sites that are contaminated, understand their level of contamination, get them to the point where they can be redevelopable, or we can understand how to redevelop them, and then create revitalization plans in those corridors. Plans that will be targeted towards attracting the types of developers and the types of development that we want to see in these corridors. And so with that, I will leave you with one last thing, and that's the East Main Street corridor. We've gotten plans in the past, but I found this article from, I think it's late 60s in the News Virginia. And it, improved East Main Street termed a major need. Yes, we've done lots of plans before, but one thing I will say is this. I think these past 4 or 5 years have really demonstrated our ability to commit and execute. I think the city is doing a very good job of that these days. And I want to try and dispel what I think is sometimes a sort of a certain apathy towards planning and creating vision and creating plans in our community. To say that this is going to be not just a blue sky plan, this is going to be something that is really targeted towards sites. It's going to have economic analysis behind it, and it's really geared much more towards action than, this particular one proposed a shuttle bus between Afton and downtown. I don't know who funds that. That's not what we're going to do with this plan. We're going to be very concrete, very pragmatic, and very realistic with that. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Philip McCaleb, who is with Environmental Standards and is the lead person on our team. And Phil, tell us who you are and what you're going to do for us.
Again, I'm Phil McCaleb with Environmental Standards. First, I'll figure out how to use this. Oh, I did something wrong.
No, yeah, I'm doing this.
We're an environmental consulting company. Our company's in Charlottesville, but Anne Marie and I, we just live in Crozet. We're shop and go to restaurants and seek entertainment over here. We feel like this is an important project for us, when you live here. That said, the EPA grants that Michael has won and that we want to talk about this evening, I think have an opportunity to provide, one of those big part of one of those 5% that, goes into these tipping points. EPA designed them or developed them to try and help stimulate redevelopment of projects by removing environmental questions. And in a second here, I'll get into the definition. But we've been involved with them over several years, and we started to see that they're more complex than that I can find and remove environmental issues with the property. But if that's the end of the thought process, then it just sits there. And that's really not helping anybody out. It doesn't help the city out. So where I'm going with all that is when I get done here in a second, I'll introduce you to some of our other team members. And they're really bringing the other additional components of looking at how to get these projects moving forward and really get them to be vital stimulants to that redevelopment of the downtown. Again, I'm with Environmental Standards. Sean will be speaking with you in a second. He's with Stromberg, Garrigan and Associates, and they're going to be doing a lot of the planning aspects of the project. The way we've broken the project down is sort of in halves, in two basic halves. We're going to be taking some of the funding and allocating it towards actually doing environmental studies on particular properties. And then the other half is going to be focused towards market analysis and planning to help to really finish out and make them usable properties. So we talk about brownfields and what is it? This is as good a simple definition as I've ever seen. It's any property that has an environmental issue or a perception of one associated with it. And many of them, it's quite much more of a perception problem than a reality problem. People go, well, geez, that's been over there, and I know there was this there, and that was that there, and at the end of the day, when we've been in and are doing our studies, it usually isn't that big of a deal. I don't want to minimize it totally, but the state's very willing to help. There's a path can be made to resolve those issues. So that's the environmental component of this program. So we'll be doing environmental standards. We'll be managing some of the site inventorying process along with the rest of the team. We'll be conducting some phase 1 site assessments, some phase 2 assessments, which are more invasive, if you will. We'll be doing some sampling and things like that that'll actually try and remove some of the environmental issues associated with the projects. And I'll let Sean take over talking about the planning and economic development.
Great. Thanks, Phil. So, as Phil mentioned, I'm Sean Garrigan, a principal with Stromberg, Garrigan Associates. Actually, my partner, Tim Stromberg's in the back there, too. We have a team that was set up, as Phil mentioned. The environmental standards is leading the environmental process with all of the technical information, working with the city folks and all of the various property owners that participate in the process, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we move ahead. But parallel, there's basically 2 parallel tracks that will be happening over the course of this project, and I'll show you the schedule as we go through the presentation. There will be this technical aspect of working with the property owners and the various interests on the environmental side, trying to determine the status and condition of various properties and their suitability for different types of redevelopment and the potential costs that might be included in that. And then the other path is the planning and economic development piece. And we, as Phil mentioned, we have a team that includes our piece where we lead the planning, physical planning on, how things might be laid out, what they might look like in terms of bricks and mortars, but also the public involvement aspect. So over the course of this project, we will engage a lot of different people with a lot of different interests, a lot of different concerns. So at the end of the process, We hope we've reached out and contacted with everyone who has a different point of view, a different concern, a different idea of what could happen here, so we can come up with very concrete, doable recommendations. And I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. But the key thing is, from the planning and economic development side, we'll be working with a firm, how do I make it go back? HR&A Advisors. They're a firm that specializes in community economic development. They do a lot of work in smaller towns like Waynesboro, specifically working on determining what opportunities exist within the marketplace and how can we tap into those opportunities, bring the private sector to the table, and hopefully link those opportunities with properties and facilitate both the cleanup of the redevelopment aspects or cleanup of the environmental aspects with the investment on the private sector. So you're trying to get all the people who may be like out there but don't know how to get together, and this project hopefully becomes a conduit. We also have some other folks on the team that help on the financing side, how to do public-private partnerships, look at the various mechanisms, how to, pull projects together, especially in these times where, financing projects is more challenging. There's a lot more due diligence that's required. And then there's a lot of unexciting stuff like coordinating with all the different agencies and getting everybody to, buy into what we're doing. So the project, as we go through, as Michael mentioned, we're going to be kind of like the overall package in the sense that all of these efforts have been going on over the years, and we're going to look at, and we have been working with the staff, looking at what's been done previously, the plans that have been worked on, things that are in the sort of hopper, they're coming down the pike as he showed, and pulling all that together and figuring out what is the complete plan on the land side. There's been a lot of emphasis on the infrastructure side. So there will be a kind of overall master plan for the area, and I'll show you roughly what the boundary is in a minute on a map. We will also do site-specific reuse plans. So part of what we'll be doing is, as we marry the economic potential with some of the specific sites, come up with some more detailed recommendations for what the development might look like on those sites. How big will it be? What's the square footage? How is it laid out? And some of that actually gets tied to the environmental. One of the questions we were talking about this earlier today is, why should a property owner participate in this project? If they have a property and they're not sure what the environmental condition is. And one of the things that we mentioned is over the years of doing this, we found that often the perception is much worse than the reality. And in many cases, if there is, say there's a small portion of a former industrial site that may have some pollution on it, depending on what it is, just the way you lay it out and maybe locate the parking is the solution to the problem. So by not participating, there's this potential stigma about the property because you don't know the reality, but by actually going through the process, and we've worked on so many projects, including doing work with environmental standards, looking at how to lay out and design projects in a way that meets the regulatory requirements. You can actually achieve multiple benefits and make a viable project where otherwise it might, never happen because there's this perception. The other two key components are the infrastructure component. Now, we talked earlier, you saw the list of the streetscaping, which is a great start, but there's other types of infrastructure you need really to support private development, and I don't think this is a surprise to anyone here. There's some stormwater management issues that exist in some of this area, so there are opportunities to do different types of improvements that may help mitigate some of those problems, and in fact, that's one of the things the EPA is specifically interested in, the green aspect of stormwater management, water quality associated with the river and habitat and so forth. So we'll be looking at how that could be integrated both in the public realm, but also into the development of the new projects to help them achieve the various permits and things they might need as a site development project. And then finally, creating this roadmap of how to implement the plan. We don't come up with grandiose visions, say, here it is, now you got to figure out how to do it. A key component of this is actually working with you to say, okay, here are the 5 real projects that we need to focus on in the next few years, and here's the strategy, here are all the partners you need to have, here's how you have to advocate, how you have to pull in the different folks to make it happen. And that's really a fundamental part of this. this aerial is not super easy to see. Is the red one the laser before I push?
Yes.
I just don't want it to turn off. Oh, yeah, okay. So here you can see the river corridor. This red line is approximately the boundary we're looking at. So the whole East Main Street, sort of 250 corridor as you come in to town from the east, and then your kind of core area of downtown and some other, kind of adjacent areas. The key thing with this is the area that we're looking at is bigger than any specific brownfield. And in fact, we approach it from an area-wide perspective, because what the EPA has learned over the years is if you have multiple brownfields, it's not just that property or even just the property right next to it that's actually potentially economically impacted from that brownfields, but the whole area starts to have a bit of a negative economic viability. So it's the idea of looking at the whole package in a cohesive manner. Going into this project, some of the things that we specifically look at, and certainly the graph that you showed, the flat line idea, is, we work in a lot of communities where the fact of the matter is the economy in this country has changed, the dynamics of industrialization have changed, and you kind of have to acknowledge where you're at and figure out what your strengths are and what your opportunities are and tap into those as much as possible. And we work through the economists and all the various folks at the regional and the city level who are doing those kinds of things to tap into the opportunities that exist. Any project that's going to happen has to acknowledge the physical and economic realities of today. And the fact of the matter is trying to finance a private development project without brownfields is hard enough. So the fact that the city is taking the lead to try to address these problems and remove that is one step closer to doing development in downtown as competitive as doing it in a greenfield or some other place where you have to extend all of this new infrastructure that has a lot of additional expense associated with it, especially long term. I think the key thing is this represents the city's initiative of kind of proactively looking at its assets and trying to improve the quality of life and vibrancy of the downtown and the adjacent areas. And having worked, in many different kinds of communities, the fact of the matter is the community identity is really shaped by the downtown. Very few communities are like, oh, they have a wonderful, Walmart shopping center. I mean, many communities we work with have that kind of development. That's a reality in the way we live today. But the sense of place and the identity is really shaped around your core downtown environment. So this project really focuses in on a lot of the efforts that have been done in the last 8 to 10 years in the city. And then finally, looking at, as I said, this idea of what infrastructure do you need so you can queue up these properties as best as possible. So I'd be remiss if I didn't give a little kudos to what the EPA expects to see come out of this project since they granted the funds. Not exactly the most exciting stuff to talk about, but specifically the Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization, who will play an active role in this project. There are things that they really want to see come out. And these are a few of the things they basically are covered in what I talked about, but I think the fundamental element is they want to see a roadmap at the end of this process with real information behind it on what the opportunities are and how you're going to try to advance cleaning up properties, working with private property owners, and not approach it from a regulatory big stick approach, but more of a how do you pull people into the fold, get people around a table, and come up with good economic redevelopment projects. So, as I mentioned earlier, we approach it from an area-wide perspective, and that's why sometimes this boundary may flex as we go through the planning process, and people say, well, my house is in Brownfields, and it's no, but you're part of this package, and we want to actually make sure what we're doing on one side of the line or in one area is cohesive with the overall context of the city. So we're looking at it as how to mesh everything together. We often hear like, I don't want to be part of that area because it's going to create some kind of stigma associated with our property, and that is not the intention at all. The process that we're going through, and that's the next thing I'm going to talk about, is all about open dialogue. And we're gonna be doing an event or a series of events over the course of a week in September that's all about what your particular interest or the community's particular interest in and how they can come to the table and get engaged in the process. Part of that is when we go into that planning process, we like to arm ourselves with a lot of information. So in the meantime, we're looking at all the data, we're talking to a lot of folks individually, and really trying to assess the overall character of what's happening on the land right now. The redevelopment, as we develop it, has to be Waynesboro. One of the things that we're very adamant about is we don't take another project and we just cut the edges off and try to place it here. We're strong believers in going through a process where we work with you, so what we develop for your community is your plan, not our plan, and it works for your particular conditions. That's one of the key things that makes it, a viable project in the end. And by going through that process, hopefully, what gets proposed is not a surprise. I mean, the places that we've worked, at the end of the process, we've heard that the community appreciates the fact that there were so many different ways to engage with the city staff and even the private sector who own properties in different venues to find out what's going on and just be part of the process in a way that they feel like it's part of their community and not something that's kind of being imposed. So the action strategies that come out of this are this idea of this kind of shared vision and then hammering it down to the things that specifically the city can really control. Because in the end, the city can't make a private property do something that they don't want to do with the property. What we can do is kind of line up all the pieces in a way that makes the project or a project as logical as possible and facilitate the process. And that includes, from a land development standpoint, one of the things that developers hate is the unknowns of time in terms of plan approval and the process you have to go through. If they know that some plans have been developed, they've been vetted by the community, there's already been a lot of discussion about what the plan is. They have a strong sense that if I come into the planning commission or I come into the council, that I'm gonna get a very favorable reception on this project because there's been all of this work done basically for me to support what I think is a viable project for a redevelopment. That is a key aspect of what we try to have come out of this process. And then it's all those little 5% things, like Michael said, that are really important that you need, the intersection alignments and the utility infrastructure and all those kinds of things will also come out of these site-specific plans for the projects that we're specifically gonna try to advance. So this slide here just illustrates some of the types of things that we do as part of the public involvement process. And this can range from, we have kickoff meetings where we can have 400 or 500 people show up to topic-specific meetings that end up being 4 or 5 property owners or one group of property owners that own one particular property around a table just to talk about issues. And by doing a process like that, we identify all of those different factors that ultimately lead to a viable plan. So when we go through the planning workshop that'll happen the week of September 23rd, which is the whole point of this actual meeting, is to get the word out about the fact that this workshop is gonna happen, because we're gonna do a lot of promotion over the next few months to get everybody ready for what's gonna occur during that week. So what we'll do is we'll have a kickoff event, which will be a very participatory event the first night, the evening of Monday the 23rd. And then over the course of the following few days, there will be meetings focused on everything from stormwater management and parks and recreation to economic development to tourism. We're still shaping what that agenda will be, and part of what we try to do is, through our analysis over the next month or so, is hone in on what the specific issues are so we can craft the meeting structures in a way that's most valuable both to the community and also to us, so we can get the information we need to make the best plan. And in fact, in the back on the table, we have a couple of aerials and some stickers, and if you have a particular issue that you really want to see be addressed through this plan, or you think is something that just as a whole needs to be acknowledged, we want to hear about it, and you can certainly talk to us as well, because we have the ability now to really shape the structure of this so it works best for your particular needs in your community. So what we'll be doing is posting the detail of the schedule probably sometime in mid-August. So there's good 4 weeks in advance of what's going to be happening and where the events are going to be held over the course of that week. The key thing is to check the website, as Michael mentioned, the revitalization downtown Waynesboro site. And if you are in the Facebook world, we like Facebook because we can throw little blasts that remind everybody that you should come to meetings. So that's a great way to participate or at least be tapped in. We also usually send out notices when we're going to be putting things up on the website so you know that they're there to take a look at. And then in the case of different community organizations and other groups like that, sometimes we even have dialogues going back and forth on Facebook. One of the projects we recently did, some of the community organizations actually got together in advance of the meeting and kind of prepared their own agenda. And they gave it to us in advance and said, we had a meeting, these are all the things that we want to see addressed in this plan, so we could actually prepare very specific work and information to get a ton of information out of that meeting for us, but also provide the group with a lot of content. So it became much more of a conversation kind of meeting instead of, I'd like to see this, I'd like to see that. We skipped a whole step. So any of that kind of activity that can happen over the summer is a great way to help inform this process. So the schedule for this project is lengthy. And most of it's the environmental technical work that will be happening over the next few years. The planning piece, however, will be relatively compact. And one of the reasons why we do this workshop structure is to be able to do a lot of work in a concentrated period of time, so it isn't like the plan takes years to develop. So our intent is to have this meeting in September over the course of that week, and then come back and basically by the end of the year, right after the first year, have the strategy for the economic development piece. And the reason why that's so important is that can help inform the environmental work. Because seems like a lot of money, but when you get into all the environmental technical work, depending on what is determined on various sites, that money can be eaten up relatively quickly. So this process can also help prioritize where money might go if it turns out there's more people who would like to participate than there's available resources. Sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's not. But the key thing is that the planning, economic development, visioning strategy piece is a relatively short process, 6-8 months of the total project period. So we have these little cards in the back. Everybody should take a bunch, pass them around, and you're going to say, I'm not exactly sure what this is, but it sounds really interesting, so I think I'm going to come and I'm going to drag you with me. So that's the story there.
That's your mission.
Yeah, that's your mission tonight. It's not uncommon for us over the course of the week to get in contact in one way or the other with 800,000 people in the community. And the reason why that works is there's so many different types of structure for people to get involved. There's meetings during the day, there's meetings in the evening. Certainly then when you add the Facebook component and some of the other web things, there's an opportunity for anyone who has any interest, even if it's just to come and sort of sit in the back and say, I want to just hear what this is about, and if it's not for me, I'm going to leave. We find that people show up and they start getting involved. And one of the things that we try to do is create exercises and things that are fun, they're engaging. It's not this kind of presentation. We actually don't like to do a lot of formal PowerPoint presentations. It's more working in groups, talking about particular issues. So we're spending your time in a way that's most efficient for you, and we get the information that we need to make the best plan. So promote this as much as possible, and that includes through any organizations that you're involved with, from Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. We do stuff with kids. We like working with youth groups. We get a lot of very interesting information and a whole different perspective on what's going on in your community. So that's one aspect. Through special interest groups, from history, environment, tourism, whatever, arts, all those different components will fit into this package. So this is the little exercise we have back there. bottom line, just, if there's any particular issue that you think this plan really needs to focus on, we'd like to know what that is. And, if you think of it after tonight, email Michael or email me, and we'll make sure we try to get it covered. So with that, I was going to just open it up for some general questions for any of us, and that's basically it. Questions?
What's the total funding amount that was so far acquired for this project?
It's a $400,000 total grant. And the funding for the grant falls into really two categories. It's two grants, really. One of them is a petroleum grant, the other one's hazardous substances. The petroleum grant obviously is trying to look at old gas stations and other underground storage tanks. And so that's sort of the broader thing, but I think that what you will see in the community is an EPA grant working along these broad lines, trying to assess sites and come up with a revitalization plan.
Okay, that 400,000 seems like a small amount of money for all the stuff that we're talking about doing here. You also mentioned a lot of fundraising involved. Do you know what the total amount that would need to be acquired in order to complete this project of this kind?
Well, I think the key thing is the 400,000 is going towards just the technical work. It's not actually doing like the construction type work. So, as Michael mentioned, there's actually two grants that are sort of joined at the hip, and the planning and economic development piece is coming. A portion of it's coming out of both grants, and then the environmental piece. It depends on the type of sites that ultimately are identified to do the environmental assessment work. At the end of the day, what we'll end up with is a plan, the redevelopment plan piece, and then a bunch of technical documents that are basically used for private developers, for financing folks to determine the cost, the regulatory issues, if there are any, that may affect the redevelopment potential of these properties. And that includes, we focus on the redevelopment, but actually parks and public space are an end use that you have to take into consideration as well, because if you'd want to take a former industrial property and convert it to public space, depending on what was on that site, you may have to do different things as well. So it's not just physically building buildings. But that's the limit of this particular grant. Then the question is, where do you go from there? And that's that the city will have to assess where they're at and the success of the project at that point and decide, where, what the next steps would be. Yes.
So you haven't actually identified any sites yet?
We've tried to focus it in on this targeted area, but the sites themselves, it's part of what we're doing right now, is going through the assessments or ranking these are the site, looking at old maps, and working through a system of data to really try and target certain sites that.
And is there a particular number that you have in mind on identifying that will keep you within this 400,000 range so that you're not, in other words, maybe you can identify 30 sites, but you really can only afford, say, 20 of those?
Yes.
Is that a possibility?
It is possible.
Yeah,
So then there's some sort of a analysis you're able to do to rule out 10?
Yeah, so that's a couple of questions there. The first one is, we will try to do an inventory, so there will be at least this, spreadsheet, for the lack of a better way to describe it. It just says, here are the properties based on a bunch of characteristics, these may qualify. It may turn out that they're not, but they're potential. And then it's kind of like marketing the program in a sense, and I know Michael and other people at the city have been already talking to some of the folks and explaining what the program is and how they can participate, and tying with also outside or non-property owners today who are interested in potentially acquiring some property and would want to have this information. So we're kind of putting all that into that chart and saying, okay, let's say there were 30 properties. There is some estimation based on what the typical steps cost for a property, how many we could potentially do. Now, we've worked on projects where we've done tons of phase ones, because half of them have been, for lack of a better way to describe it, a paper pushing exercise. You find out there's very little concern and you don't have to do very much. And then some sites you get into them, and this is usually known before you start, that you have to do a lot of work on the phase 2 level. There's a lot of investigation and a lot of other things that have to happen, and that eats up a larger chunk of money. Usually those are done because you have a willing property owner and a willing investor to do something with the property. So that's why those properties get more of the financial resources.
And I think one point to follow on that, so the work products that we're talking about, the plan part is sort of like set out in one part of the budget for the project, and the environmental investigations are in the other. So we're going to be doing the plan, we're going to be getting the work product of, this is where we should be going in the future, here are the 5 or 6 projects we should be pursuing. Those 5 or 6 projects that we pursue, that's where it's sort of like, and here are probably some good funding sources that will promote those particular projects. So if we, I don't know, pick the project that you're thinking in your mind, and we want to do
Virginia Metal
that.
Crafters.
Okay, Virginia Metal Crafters, we want to make that an incubator for new startup tech business. That's what we come out with. That's going to get funded out of something outside of this particular grant.
I think the other piece related to the budget is on our side, the planning and economic development piece. One of the reasons also, besides the momentum we get by doing like a week long of intense process, it's very efficient for us because we can get a lot of concentrated information and we can come in and focus just on your project in a concentrated chunk of time and achieve an enormous amount of work in a short period of time, which we appreciate. It's better efficiency for the city, for their budget, and the community appreciates because they can see how, starting at the week where we were at, and then what we show up with in terms of conceptual drawings and renderings and things of what this might look like, how the pieces might go together in a very short, efficient process. So if this was one where it went out for 2 years and we had multiple meetings and it was like we have some ideas and then we'll come back, it's not nearly as efficient. And it just, frankly, we like the enthusiasm and the momentum you get by coming in. We'll bring a whole pile of people here, we'll camp out somewhere, have basically a studio set up, we bring all of our equipment, and it becomes like our office in the city. And anybody, we have times when people can just come in and talk to us, and it's very conducive to developing, good ideas in an efficient manner. Any other questions? So we're going to see all of you times 20 in September. So that's your task, especially, is to, certainly if there are groups that you think we should invite and or folks in the community that you think should be involved in the process that you may not heard about this meeting or couldn't make it here, we want to know who they are. Certainly pass the word on to them, and as we set up the specific meetings, I'll use Park and Rec as an example. We'll work with the city staff. There'll be certain people that they know will want to be part of that process, and then we ask. Every meeting is basically of that type about a topic is open to the public. So you'll see on the schedule when it's posted, it'll say, this is what will be discussed. But if you want to come in, anyone's welcome to come in and talk about stormwater management. That's usually the group where we either have the people who have real issues, or it's a lot of engineering people who just want to talk about pipes. Exciting conversation. So, anything else? Otherwise,
Let me say one last thing, which is, I guess part of the reason why I was attracted to this project and really this firm is they work in communities like ours, and they're very familiar with the struggles that we have and the goals that we're trying to achieve. Ranson, West Virginia is a city that they've been working in. They just received a national award for their work there. Ranson, for those of you who don't know, is on the other side of the Shenandoah Valley where Charlestown is. It's got a CSX line running through it, and a Norfolk and Southern line. It's got a hotel that looks like, Fairfax Hall, the Hill. It's kind of Waynesboro, 100 miles to the north. So I think we can really harness some of the things that they've learned and really make what Waynesboro needs, a Waynesboro solution that we can create in our city for our problems and our opportunities and really succeed. So I think it's a good fit, and I'm very excited about starting this process. And I look forward to you all as community leaders really helping us, the planning department, make this your plan and taking some of the load off of what we have to do at our end by helping us promote and really participate in this process. So thank you so very much for coming out tonight.
Yep.
And I'm excited and I'm looking forward to this summer. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.